Radan, and I'm the Director of the JD program at Macquarie Law School at Macquarie University. Welcome to our session. This is a session where we will go through some information to inform you about the Juris Doctor program at Macquarie University, commonly referred to as the JD. Let me first give you a broad overview of the JD program. It's a 3-year program. It's offered at postgraduate level, which means that it's only available to people who have an undergraduate degree. It doesn't matter what discipline that degree is, but you must have a degree. The program is offered on a full-time or part-time basis, and it is offered on a on-campus or by distance mode, and students can from time to time vary their mode and the degree of participation, whether it's full-time or part-time. And a feature of the program is its flexible delivery. What we mean by that is that there's a substantial online component, which is mainly in most subjects. Lectures are delivered online, but there is also a combination of face-to-face teaching, in essence, mainly through weekly tutorials for on-campus students, but also intensive on-campus sessions for distance students. The program is, as I said, a postgraduate program for graduates who have another degree, and the JD program is effectively a professional legal qualification. In that sense, it has a similar function as the undergraduate LLB or law degree program, in that both the LLB and the JD qualify graduates for legal practice in Australia, in any jurisdiction. However, to get admitted to legal practice, you need to have the academic qualification, which in this case is the Juris Doctorate, but also after that, you need to complete a period of practical legal training. That's done through other institutions, such as the College of Law, and it is a combination of teaching or attendance in various classes and seminars, but is also employment-based as well. Now, the PLT course that you do may, in some jurisdictions, but not in New South Wales, count to your PLT program. Let me give you some overview, firstly, of why perhaps you would want to come to Macquarie University to do a JD. Firstly, the traditional approach to teaching at Macquarie University is contextual and interdisciplinary. In other words, what we seek to do is not study law in a vacuum, but to study law in a context. So that most of the units that you will do will have coverage of the doctrinal work that you need to know, but also we'll put it into a context, be it a political context, a social context, or economic context, and so on. Macquarie University has had a long period of distance education, and we have considerable expertise in distance and online delivery, and that's of particular relevance for those of you that want to take this course as distance students, given that you may be living in other jurisdictions and indeed other countries. We also have in this program, as in all our programs, an emphasis on skills. Of course, what we try to do is give you experience and exposure and practice in the sort of skills that you're going to need if you move on into professional legal practice. And these skills components and capabilities are embedded throughout the 3-year program that is the JD. We also, given that it is a postgraduate qualification, encourage independent research and analysis, and that is largely done through research papers that you have to do in all of your units, and there are some specialist units that are like doing a mini dissertation. So you do a long research paper so that you can develop these research skills, which are very handy when it comes to legal practice. One of the singular features of our JD program, which is not present in many others, is the compulsory professional community and engagement unit that we have. This is in effect a workplace unit where part of the unit involves you getting work experience, be it in a legal firm, be it in a legal aid centre, be it working with non-governmental organisations. There's a whole raft of professional and community groups that we have associations with, where you go out and in effect get considerable work experience, but through an academic structure. Now, the structure of the program is that you have to complete 24 units. 18 of those are what we call the core and compulsory units, and then you do 6 electives, and there's a wider range of electives that you can choose from. And you can, if you wish, do a specialisation, so that you focus, particularly through your electives, in terms of the choices that you make, on grouping them within a particular specialisation. Now, the core units that we have are listed on the screen at the moment, and there you can see what those units are. And they're done throughout the degree. Obviously, in the first year of the study, you will be doing only compulsory units, and then the elective units come along towards the back end of the program. Now, the reason that there are these compulsory units is that the legal profession requires certain areas of law to be covered. These are sometimes referred to as the priestly requirements, and every law program must teach across these areas. And these areas are to be found in these units that we have as our core and compulsory units. However, there are a couple of units that are compulsory that are not required, if you like, by the priestly requirements, but we at Macquarie Law School think that they are absolutely essential to any legal practitioner. For example, one of those is international law. In this modern global environment, a knowledge of international law is absolutely essential for anybody who wants to engage in legal practice, and therefore we have made that a compulsory unit in our program. Now, as I said earlier, we have specialisations, and on your screen now you can see that there's the corporate and commercial specialisation, environmental law specialisation, an international law specialisation, media and technology law specialisation, and a social justice specialisation. Now, you do not need to complete a specialisation if you don't want to. You can just do a degree and pick and choose whatever electives you want without actually completing any specialisation. And there's good reason if you want to do that, because you can then get a taste of various areas of the law as perhaps a way of seeking out those areas of the law that you may wish to practice in upon completion of the degree. With respect to our teaching and how you will study, as I mentioned earlier, the program is a flexible one with blended learning, in that we have substantial online components, particularly lectures, but also face-to-face teaching. But you are expected and encouraged to engage in independent self-directed learning, and that will be done in particular in relation to the various assignments and research projects that you'll have to undertake as part of this progress. You will also be encouraged and expected to participate and interact with academic staff and your fellow students, and in particular that will take place through the face-to-face teaching in tutorials and seminars. You can expect the work to be fairly difficult and challenging, but also extremely interesting. And as I said, with our embedded skills that we include within our program, you will develop skills that will serve you wherever you may end up in your professional lives, be it as practicing lawyers or in some other field where your law degree will be of use and benefit. I want to say something now about getting into the JD program and the pathways. We have, for the JD, what we call 2 streams of students, and those are firstly what we call the Commonwealth supported places. For those of you that are familiar with the Australian educational system, that's basically the HECS-based admission, where you pay the higher education contribution scheme levies. And we also have a full fee paying cohort of students in this program. Now, the CSP places are competitive and they are awarded on academic merit, and you are required to be eligible for a CSP place a minimum GPA of 5.46 out of a scale, on a scale of 7. If you don't have that GPA, then you would be offered a full fee paying place, but again, there is a minimum GPA requirement there of 4.4 out of 7. We also, however, do facilitate students being able to transfer from a full fee paying and therefore more expensive place to a CSP place during their program. So a student who may have got a full fee paying place can, after completing the equivalent of 1 year full-time study, that is 32 credit points or 8 subjects, then apply for a CSP place. That is also competitive and is based upon your results in the JD units that you have completed, not on your earlier degree. And if you have a GPA of 5.46 in relation to your JD units, then you are in the running to be transferred from a full fee paying system to a CSP place. Now, students that seek to get admitted to the JD but don't meet those minimum qualifications, be it for a CSP place or a full fee paying place, can be admitted to 2 other programs, the Graduate Certificate in Law and the Graduate Diploma in Law. These programs do exactly the same units, but far less of them as the JD students, so you would be doing the study with the JD students, and provided you get the relevant GPA that's required for admission to those programs in your graduate certificate or graduate diploma, you can then what we call articulate into a JD program, and you'll get credit for all the units that you've completed in the graduate certificate or in the graduate diploma. You'll get credit for those towards your JD. So there is a pathway if you don't first get into the JD to get into it by means of doing either the graduate certificate or the graduate diploma program. Again, many students just want to get a taste of law and do not want to complete a full law program, and those students are satisfied with either a graduate certificate or a graduate diploma. All applications for these programs, the JD or the 2 graduate certificate and graduate diploma programs, are processed through the university's admission centre, and you have the website details on the screen right now. For further inquiries about the JD, you have the details of our administrative assistant in the law school, Eleanor McGee, and you've got her telephone number and email address, but you can also get in touch with any member of staff, including myself, by logging on to the Macquarie Law School webpage and contacting and finding our contact details if you wanted to speak to anybody, in particular myself, with respect to any queries that you may have about the JD program. Well, that now concludes the short presentation in relation to the JD program, and it's going to be now a time for your questions, and I'm assuming that we have a few questions, and please feel free to ask questions as I deal with each of these questions as they come up. Okay. Well, the first question here comes from, and I'll have to put on my glasses because I can't see. The first question comes from Lisa, which says, what support is offered by staff for students? Well, I'm not quite sure what that means, but the staff, the academic staff are there obviously to provide the teaching through lectures, tutorials and so on, but all academic staff are there for consultation for students who may be having some difficulties, and all our staff are ready and quite ready and willing and able, as we say in law, to meet with students, to discuss issues outside the formal class structure of the lectures and the tutorials. So that's in terms of the academic staff, and you should feel free at any time to be able to contact any of your lecturers and or tutors. In relation to other staff, obviously our administrative staff are there and on hand to deal with any sort of administrative issues that you have. If you're talking about staff beyond the law school, we have a wide variety of services that are there to assist students. For example, sometimes students have writing issues or difficulties in writing and language, particularly international students. There's a vast array of support services for students that may be experiencing some difficulties along those lines. So that is, I hope, an answer to that question about the support that is offered by staff. If Lisa wants to ask a supplementary, please do so. Just type it in and we'll get to that question if I haven't answered your question completely. The next question comes from Tisha McCoy. It is, how often will distance students be required to attend intensive sessions? Well, that's a very good question, and perhaps I should have covered that in my brief presentation. With respect to distance students, unless we're dealing with some particularly unusual subject, because it's not a typical subject, of which there may be one or two in the program, but routinely students doing it by on distance will have to attend 2 days of on-campus sessions. These are run in our mid-semester break, and they're 2 consecutive days, and attendance at those 2 days is compulsory. Now, we understand that in certain circumstances, students may not be able to attend for good reason, and provided the reason is a fair and legitimate one, what we usually do then is to require students to do some other form of work. It might be some written work, and that typically is what we might require them to do in lieu of attending. Also, with respect to these on-campus sessions for distance students, there is a 3rd day that we run, and that's run towards the end of each semester. However, attendance at the 3rd day of these on-campus sessions is not compulsory. It's highly recommended, and particularly if you are within the sort of proximity to the university and don't have to travel far, you'd be very wise to attend. But we understand that we do have students who have to travel long distances to attend the compulsory sessions, so we do make that 3rd day compulsory. So those 3 days will total 18 hours of seminar time, which is exactly the same number of hours each unit has with on-campus students. So in that sense, there's really no difference between the face-to-face teaching that you will typically get in units, whether you're a distance student or whether you're an on-campus student. It's just that it's either on an intensive basis for distance students, but on a week-to-week basis for internal students. So I hope that's answered Tisha's question. Let's move on to the next question. Erin, she says, hello, I'm wondering, also hoping, whether there is any intention to offer animal law as an elective for JD students. I attended an information session last year and was informed that it is currently only available for undergraduates. I have investigated cross-institutional study opportunities and they are not promising. UTS, for example, told me that there is a next to no chance that I will be able to secure a place. I'm currently an undergraduate student at Macquarie and would love to continue studying there. Look, that's a great question, Erin, and I have a particular affinity for animal law in that I was involved in setting up that unit, but I don't teach it. I was participating in it at an earlier stage, but I don't teach it. It's now currently taught by Dr. Jed Goodfellow, who is absolutely superb, and has attracted a lot of interest from our undergraduate students. At this stage, it's not offered as a unit at postgraduate level for the JD students, but it's certainly something that in my role as director I'll be looking to see whether we can do so. One of the reasons for this is that we can't offer the same number of electives for postgraduate students simply because the JD cohort is much smaller. And one of the things that we do at Macquarie, and it's not necessarily done at all universities, is that we quarantine our JD students in that we run dedicated classes to them, for them. We don't mix our JD students with undergraduate students doing the sort of equivalent, but at undergraduate level law, so that we need a critical mass of students before we can start to offer too many electives. However, one way that you may be able to further your interest in animal law is to seek to do an aspect of animal law as part of a research unit within the JD. But at this stage, unfortunately, we don't have an animal law unit at that level. If there were to be one at the postgraduate level elsewhere, you could then apply to do that unit at that particular institution if it is available. But at the moment, I'm not aware that any other university offers animal law at the postgraduate level. Sadly, I have to say. Okay, let's move on to our next question. That's from Wo Lin Sun, if I've pronounced the name correctly. It says, hi, I've done an LLB previously through distance learning with a university in London. If it is possible for me to get credit for the units I've studied in this course? Wo Lin, the answer simply is no. The reason for that is that undergraduate degrees in Australia are classified as a level 8 unit on this scale of 0 to 10, whereas the JD is a level 9 unit. It's studied at a higher level than undergraduate programs, and you can't get credit for units studied at an undergraduate level for programs that are offered at a postgraduate level. So unfortunately, you won't be able to do that in getting your JD. But your query prompts me to ask a question as to, if you already have a law degree, why do you want to do the JD? The law degree is a qualification for legal practice. I understand yours is one based in the UK. If you are seeking to become a legal practitioner in Australia, you don't need to do a JD. You just need to apply to the Legal Profession Admission Board in New South Wales, and you'll get a significant credit for your English degree. You will be required to do a couple of units of study, which you can do through the Legal Profession Admission Board, and that will therefore enable you thereafter to get admitted to legal practice. There's quite a lot of overseas qualified lawyers who seek to come to practice in New South Wales or elsewhere in Australia, and that's the typical way that they do it. But getting back to your original question, no, we can't give you credit for anything done at an undergraduate level towards a unit in the JD. Okay, Whitey Woo says, when will CSP applicants be informed about the result, since the CSP intakes are very competitive and limited? Well, see, the applications that are processed through the UAC do come to us, and then they eventually end up on my desk as the director, and I'd have to check that that the applicant, is eligible for a CSP place. I generally do that fairly quickly, within a few days of receiving the application. I'm not quite sure how long it takes to get from the UAC to the university, but I generally get them fairly quickly once they are processed by the university, and the university responds usually within a few days. with the result of your application. I've already been processing applications, and I've also had students that have, having been accepted or received the outcome of their application, have contacted me. So the process is fairly quick once it gets to the university, but I can't be 100% sure as to how long it takes from when you lodge it with the UAC and before it gets to the university for them to be able to process it internally. But you'll certainly, students that have been applying already now for our June intake, the students that have already applied have been processed, and apart from the ones that I processed a few days ago, all of those students will know the outcome of their application. I should mention, and this query prompted me to also mention that the admissions that we have admissions at the beginning of each academic year. In other words, to start in late February, early March in semester 1, but we also have an intake that can start mid-year in semester 2, which usually kicks off around about the end of July or the first week in August. Okay, the next question I have here comes from Amreka Sharma. What would you say makes Macquarie Law stand out over the law school at, say, UNSW or Sydney University? Well, that's a good question. Look, all of the law schools will offer fairly similar programs, and that stems from the fact that the priestly requirements that I referred to earlier, every law program has to satisfy those requirements. So that core compulsory unit, roughly 2/3, maybe a little bit more of the degree, is going to be pretty much the same everywhere. There will be differences in terms of electives that can be offered. Each university will have its own collection of electives, but again, there's often a fair amount of similarity. So in that sense, there's not going to be a lot of difference between any of the university programs in terms of what you actually study or what you can study. What makes University of or Macquarie the place to go? Well, look, I would suggest that it's a good thing if you can, and I don't know whether you can, is to visit the universities if you're sort of within the neighbourhood and have a look around the place, get a feel for the place. Some people love the campus that we have, some people don't like it, some people love Sydney's campus, some people don't like it. So that can help. One of the things I think that attracts students to Macquarie is that we have an absolutely first-class modern library. The library that we have opened up a few years ago, it is absolutely magnificent in terms of its architecture and the facilities and services that it offers in terms of students being able to work in the library. There's a whole raft of different rooms and equipments and so on that students can use as part of their study. And it is just a really lovely place to go to, in fact. So that's one thing. And remember, the library is the heart of any university. This is a place where you do learn, and libraries are at the very core of learning. I think the other thing that differentiates Macquarie from other universities is, as I said, that interdisciplinary and contextual approach that we take to delivery of our programs. Macquarie was at the forefront of interdisciplinary approaches to teaching in law. Most universities do it to a degree, and we, as I said, have a long history and a dedication to that. So depending on the type of program that you would like, that might be a reason why you would choose Macquarie over Sydney, or indeed choose Sydney over Macquarie. Look, all of these institutions offer excellent programs. One has to be honest and upfront about that. You're not going to do poorly by going to any of those institutions and getting your qualification. I don't know, and I'm not sure, but I don't think most of the universities offer distance programs. But that may be a factor that would sway you to come to Macquarie, particularly if you don't live within the Sydney metropolitan area. So it's very hard for me to say, look, go here and come here, don't go over there. You will get an excellent education wherever you go. but then it's ultimately a question for you to determine. Do some what we call due diligence, make some inquiries, visit those places if you can, and then you'll be able to make the best and informed choice that you can. But you won't go wrong by coming here. Okay, the next question we've got is from Michael Ataya. He says, does prior knowledge studies over 10 years old and a work experience considered as credit? Basically, no. We do have a recognition for prior learning, but you've got to mount a fairly significant case. In terms of prior study that you might have done, if you've completed some study or some units that would be equivalent to any of the units that we offer here, you can make application for it. And we certainly do give credit for students who have completed it. For example, we have quite a number of students that transfer to Macquarie from their JD program elsewhere. They choose to transfer, and generally, if you've completed JD units at some other university and then transfer to here, you will get credit for most of those units, if not all of them. The 10 years issue, that's an interesting one, because I know the legal profession itself is mulling over and quite concerned about students that seek admission to legal practice but completed their studies more than 10 years ago. Simply on the basis that in some particular areas, a lot of water has flown under the bridge, and your knowledge that you may have gained 10, 12, 15 years ago has become stale and needs to be in effect updated. But ultimately, it's a question of a case by case analysis. But in principle, yes, we do give credit for study completed at postgraduate level elsewhere, and also you can make a case, but it's not easy based upon work experience or other experiences. We do have a policy with respect to that, but your experience has got to be fairly significant and strong before you'll be able to get what we call recognition for prior learning and experience. Okay, the next question comes from Natalie White. She says, if you are studying at another, I don't know what that is, university, I presume, as Macquarie Conveyancing Law and Practice program, would this be considered as prior learning? No, again, I think I understand the question. We at Macquarie have a program that qualifies people as conveyancers. Again, that is not a program at level 9. Therefore, the units that you've covered in that program would not count as prior learning and give you credit. It may be a qualification that might be part of your application for admission to the program, but you won't get any credit for that towards the JD program. And the same applies for any of you that may have completed usually some sort of economics or commerce degree where you have done some legal subjects, typically tax or company law. You won't get credit for those in the JD, and indeed, almost invariably, if you were to do just an undergraduate LLB, you wouldn't get credit for law programs that form part of commerce, marketing, or economics programs either. Okay, the next question comes from Lisa. I'm not sure if I want to be a solicitor. I'm more interested in working in politics or in international relations, as I have an interest in working in the international legal sphere, in the UN or EU, for example. Is it worth studying the JD? Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. If you are involved in anything in that sort of world, in the world of international relations, a law degree is going to be of absolute benefit to you. And obviously, somebody like Lisa who wants to pursue that sort of career direction would, I imagine, seek to do an international law specialization where she could, or you could, do quite a number of international law related units. So yes, absolutely. One of the things that you may well choose to do is to also participate in what we call our Jessup Moot, which is perhaps one of the strongest mooting competitions in the world, and Australia does extremely well in it, which is an international law moot. It's all part of building up a CV. But we have a number of our students in the past that have done exactly what Lisa likes to do or is seeking to do, have on the basis of their law degree with a strong focus on international law related subjects, ended up working in various UN or international bodies. Indeed, our former dean, for example, just recently retired as dean, completed her degree and worked on a commission in relation to Eritrea. And a number of our students are now working in Geneva and in The Hague and various places in what you might call the international sphere. So yeah, absolutely. It's an excellent qualification for the purposes of anybody wanting to do any sort of international related work. So go for it, Lisa. Juanita says, does student require to register after completion of the course to become a legal practitioner? Okay, this is a question really, how do you become a lawyer once you've completed the course? Well, once you've completed your degree, you also need to complete the practical legal training program, and you just simply apply through the various providers of that program. And once you've done that, you just simply make an application to the Legal Profession Admission Board, where basically what you need to show is that you've completed the academic qualification, that is your JD, and the practical legal training program. You also have to show that you are a person of good fame and character, and that's processed, and then you just simply get admitted to legal practice. Now, that could be either as a solicitor or as a barrister in New South Wales, but in some jurisdictions in Australia, you can practice as both a solicitor and barrister. So the process of actually admission is basically filling in the appropriate forms and lodging them with the LPAB, and then attending a ceremony in the Supreme Court, and you are then a fully fledged solicitor or barrister. Michael Attea says, I completed a Master's of Legal Studies at New South Wales in 2008. Would any of my studies be credited? And the answer to that is a very simple one. If they are at a postgraduate or level 9 level, yes, provided that the units correspond to the units that we offer in the JD. So that's a very straightforward, simple question. The next question is from Mark Watson. It says, hello, I am a current Macquarie undergraduate student who has participated in the Global Leadership Program and as part of my degree undertaken PACE units. I'm keen to apply for the opportunity to study for a session overseas. Is this something the JD program accommodates? Have other JD graduates undertaken units overseas? Look, I'm not aware of our students, any of our JD students, doing overseas programs, but in principle, there's no reason why you can't. Macquarie has a very strong commitment to facilitating students doing some study overseas as part of their programs. What you would need to do in this case, obviously, is to do several units at master's level at an appropriate university, and we have connections with many universities across the globe, virtually anywhere you want to go. So there wouldn't be any difficulties or issues with you doing a session overseas. It's just a matter of finding the appropriate university that you want to go to, and also then finding the units that you would find as equivalents, if you like. And that certainly is possible, particularly in the areas of international law. It's a bit more difficult when it comes to finding comparable units in other areas. That, again, a lot depends upon where you go. It would be relatively easy, for example, to do commercial law units in other common law jurisdictions such as the United States or the UK or New Zealand. But it'd be much more difficult with those sorts of units if you were to take them, for example, in continental Europe or other civil law systems. So again, but generally there shouldn't be any problem finding in the 4 units or 3 to 4 units that you want to do overseas during a semester of study overseas. Next question comes from Robert Chiarello. Hi, I'm tossing up between ANU and Macquarie in relation to the JD. However, want to customise my subjects around the area of sports law. Is Macquarie able to fulfil this? Not really. To be honest, we don't have any sports law units at postgraduate level. We did run a one-off sports law unit at our undergraduate program because there was somebody that was visiting and was interested in did a one-off summer school program in sports law, but unfortunately we don't have any sports law units either in our undergraduate program or in our the JD program. So to the extent that that's a critical thing that you want to be able to study, then unfortunately we won't be able to help you on that in that sense. However, by the same token, sports law and what goes into sports law is in effect looking at areas of law that you would have covered in your core units. You would be looking at contract law, you would be looking at tort law, you would be looking at other areas of employment law, but there would be a particular focus of the context being, in the context of sports. So you'd be looking at, contracts, perhaps, for example, that players enter into in relation to contracting with teams to play, for example, football or something like that. But that's going to be a contract law unit and probably would focus more on the specific provisions that might apply in such sports-related contracts. But all of these sort of courses like sports law or the law and the teacher, they are all basically a combination of bits and pieces from other units with a particular focus on the context, whether it's as a teacher or whether it's in sport or whether it's in health and so on. So there's no real necessity for you to do a sports law unit to go into sports law if that's what you want to end up with. Okay, Mark Watson asks the question, hello, I'm a current Macquarie undergraduate. I think I've already answered that question about the global leadership and studying overseas. I'm not sure if we have any other questions at this stage. If there are some questions, we, I think, still have a little bit more time to answer your questions. If I'll just give it a bit of a time for students or you to write a question if you have one. Let me say something about, in the meantime, about our tutorials. As I said, we've been very careful at Macquarie to make sure that our the JD students are taught as a cohort and not mixed with other students doing law subjects of a similar kind as part of their undergraduate law degree. And this year we did have our first lot of graduates who completed the program, and they were absolutely delighted with that because they got to know each other very, very well. They socialised, they had a great time together. Apart from the study that they had to do, they really enjoyed themselves socially, and I think some permanent relationships have emerged as a result. So, yes, we do have some questions I didn't realise. So let's go on to Danielle Cooper. What kind of assessments can we expect as part of the JD program? Okay, well, in most of the units, and in particular the core units, you will typically have some form of end of session or end of semester examination. In most cases, that is a take-home examination. You will also have, typically in most units, to do assignments or essays up to about 5,000 words. Usually not always, but typically 2 assignments. So, for example, I teach 2 of the core units, contracts and equity, and in relation to the assessment regime for both of those units, students will do 1 research essay, which will be to research a particular topic or theme, and then do another assignment, which would be to solve a legal problem in torts or in equity. And then they'll have a final examination at the end. And that, or slight variations of that, is a fairly standard form of assessment. It is incumbent on us, because it is at a postgraduate level, that you do research, and that's done through these research papers and assignments. And as I said, most units will require you to do assignments of up to about 5,000 words, either as a single or as a couple of assignments. So that's how most of the assessments take place. Some may have other assessments in terms of class participation. That generally doesn't count for a huge percentage of the marks. That may also be another form of assessment. Some units may have some quizzes here and there, but it's basically exams at the end of the session, and typically some research papers to be done during the course of the session. Okay. I'm trying to get his question. Not sure. I think he was asking a question about the commercial law specialisation. That would build upon the company law and commercial transactions units that are compulsory. Typical units that a person would do in that sort of commercial law specialisation would be tax law, competition and consumer law, perhaps international trade and finance, those sorts of units. There's a selection that you can make, but that'd all be sort of commercially related. Okay. Let's see, do we have some more questions? We do? Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for this evening. I hope you found it useful and informative. And if there are further questions, please forward them to us through the contact details that I gave you towards the end of my presentation. I'm going to sign off in a moment, but you'll see on your screen now a series of questions for a little survey. I would ask you to take a few moments to complete those questions, because the answers to those questions are very informative and helpful for us in terms of any further sort of presentations and details that we will make in relation to your JD program. So good night, and I hope to see many of you at Macquarie at some stage in the near future.